getting a wedding certificate. But can you talk about some of the challenges your office has when it comes to whether it's funding and resources or administrating over all the various, you have so many responsibilities, challenges that your office might face at this present moment when it comes to doing all those functions and with the resources or just the ability to do those functions?
Sure, and thank you again for this opportunity. Chairperson Powers, I would say that right now our biggest challenge, like most city agencies or all city agencies, are the pegs that we had in the last year, due to the budget issues, which I know you're all familiar with. We had substantial cuts in last year's budget and cuts in our out years as well. So our shortfall for fiscal year 25 is over $400,000. And that's the entire budget. In addition, our headcount was reduced from 60 to 55. And we're still over our headcount at the present because we had, I think, 3 people return from maternity leave, or maternity and paternity leave, since the headcount was reduced. So we can't, we still have to bring those people back. So we're still over the head count. So, I mean, that's really the biggest issue. But, I mean, one thing as a small city agency, I've known since, I started working there that, we are expected to do more with less. And we always, make every effort to do that. And I think we've always adhered to that as one of our mottos, if you will. But it definitely makes things more difficult. Right now we can't bring on any college aides to help us with the office, so it makes it more difficult for us to meet the number of appointments that we have for people getting marriage licenses. I mean, I think it's counterproductive. If I had the chance to speak before OMB, I would say that I think on the revenue side, these cuts are definitely counterproductive because number one, we've had to reduce the number of appointments that we have on Friday, which is always the busiest day of the week, because on Friday every single couple shows up for their appointment. Now the appointments we put on the calendar since the pandemic are not always kept. They're free of charge. You can, anyone can take one of the appointments on our Project Cupid website, but Fridays are the day that everybody shows up. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, not so much. So that's, that would, that really prevents us from providing the maximum amount of service that we have in terms of marriage licenses, marriage ceremonies, and happy couples. And, and one way in which that's a big issue, I know this is, kind of outdated, but in 2013, NYC Go did an analysis of the impact of marriage equality on New York City's economy. So they looked at the number of people that have traveled to New York in the first year that marriage equality happened, and they, did an analysis of the number of hotel rooms, the number of, restaurants, museum visits, all the things that happen when people come to New York City. And they found that there was a $70 million direct revenue impact on the city, and I think it was $156 million in ancillary revenue, the money that goes to everybody that, to all the ancillary businesses, the cabs, the restaurants, all the things that people in New York City do while they're visiting. So that's just one area. On the lobbying side, we have a very small group of dedicated people doing the work that in New York State, we have, I think, we have 5 people working full-time in the lobbying bureau, and we have more than half of the number of people that the state lobbying issue, COALEG, I think is what it's now referred to, has. And I think they have, over 20 people just focused on lobbying. So we're doing like the Lion, that kind of work with 5 people. So we know how to juggle work. And I'm very fortunate to have a dedicated, smart, excellent team. But we get everything done because we've kind of learned how to do things on a calendar basis. So we do enforcement in the beginning of the year. We just got through our first round of appearances at oath. All of the adjudication of lobbying issues are done at oath, and then we do training in the second half of the year. So, and then we do audits throughout the year. So right now we need more people in the lobbying bureau. It's just if somebody were to be out sick or if somebody were to leave, we would be in a big jam. One of the things that I spoke before the Committee on Government Operations recently, and just on lobbying activities. And one of the things we have not been able to do is hire a full-time trainer. Now, the full-time trainer was funded as part of Local Law 129 of 2013, and I have my 2 attorneys, my deputy city clerk and my assistant counsel, focusing on doing all the training of all the lobbyists. We've been doing it virtually. We used to have them come to the office, and we were able to do multiple training sessions. We've been doing it virtually in recent years, and we really could do more if we had a full-time trainer, and those other people could focus more on investigations, on doing more things that we don't have the time to invest because we're just barely getting by, or can I say we're just treading water, as it were. So I'd say those are the biggest challenges in front of us right now.
Thank you. And also, we're joined by Councilor Brooks Powers virtually as well. Just one last question for me. You oversee the Lobbying Bureau. Often a topic we discuss around exactly, and there's bills in the City Council right now related to provisions around lobbying, extending lobbying bans, things like that. Can you just talk from your experience about how you think the current lobbying laws, regulations, and things that you're doing too, training, how they're working in order to keep the lobbying world, industry, how to keep them compliant, how to create the necessary distance and separation between government and lobbying, especially when folks are outgoing. Just talk a little bit about what your bureau is overseeing and how you think the current regulations and laws are working.
I think the current regulations are working pretty well. I think that New York City has a robust regulatory scheme. I know that because other cities, when they are talking about or deciding to enact lobbying regulation, they call us, and they look at what the City Council did, and like we've been a model for some of those other cities, and I think that the vast majority of lobbyists want to comply and they want to be out there, and like the more business that they're doing, the more business they will attract. So I think that most lobbyists are, reporting. Maybe some are over-reporting, but it's certainly, I would say, the vast majority of lobbyists have been reporting pretty successfully. I think, some lobbyists have better compliance departments than others. That's always an issue, but. We make it clear to the lobbyists that the most important thing that you need to know is that the public has a right to know who is lobbying their government and how much they're being paid to do so. So that is why it's so important that you are on time with your lobbying reports. So we keep an eye on our lobbyists. We know who's registered. If somebody hasn't been complying, we will make phone calls. We will say, hey, like we noticed that you haven't been doing that. We through that process and through the training process, and we remind people what the lobbying deadlines are. We remind people that it's always better to register than to not register. And we try to take the kind of approach that the Conflict of Interest Board takes with city employees. We try to, let people know, if you have any questions, ask us. We would much rather you ask us, and get it right, rather than we find out after the fact and there has to be, the possibility of fines and maybe worse. The teeth that the lobbying law has that we use to make sure that the lobbying law is enforced are the late fees. So the late fee for each lobbyist is $25 per day per client. And for new first-time lobbyist filers, it's $10 per day per client. So if you do not file, if you do not report one of your clients, or like you forget to report, or you're not reporting, the late fees can be substantial. In the last 12 months, we had we had a seemingly large increase in the number of late fees, and we know that it's not for lack of effort. Even lobbyists that attend training and that know what their responsibilities are still compiling pretty substantial late fees. So, that's something that we're always looking to do. We don't want to unnecessarily have people paying substantial late fees, but, that's the way we kind of keep the community focused on doing their compliance and doing so in a timely fashion. One of the great improvements of the office has been the lobbyist reporting database. The lobbying reporting database shows, who the lobbyists are, how much they're reporting. It, allows you to upload the paper, I'm sorry. Thank you. The retainer. I'm having a brain fart. It allows you to upload your retainer, so we know the retainer fee. I'm sorry, the retainer contract between the lobbyist and the clients. You can upload, other information as needed, and it's very effective in terms of being a resource for people to know who is lobbying the government and how much they're getting paid to do so. So that has been a very handy, tool in our enforcement, and we're happy about that. So lobbyists know that this information is out there for the public, and we think that that's the best incentive for people to do their filing.
Thanks. We're going to now go to member questions, and we have a question from Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Good to see you. First, of course, we know you. I know you I feel like in a very personal way because of all the tears that flowed when I was swearing in with my family that first day. So thank you for what you have done for our city and the many aspects that you have. My question is about the office. So you mentioned that you have a current head count of 55, but there are 60 people who are working in the office. Can you just tell us about what are those roles and responsibilities, and a little bit about the diversity and how those staff that work in the clerk's office represent the city of New York?
Sure. So it's actually 59. We had one person went to another city agency last week. So we can't even think about hiring anyone new until we get down below that head count. So we have, I would say most of the office works in the the Marriage Bureau. We have an office in each of the 5 boroughs that focuses on providing marriage licenses, marriage ceremonies. We have in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, we have 6 people working full time. Staten Island, we have 2 people working full time, and the rest of the staff work in Manhattan. We have, every year we have our mandatory audit with the EEOC, and we are on very good terms with the EEOC. We've received good marks in terms of our diversity. We have, I would say, I think there are more female members of the staff than male members of the staff. We definitely are, diverse, and I think the percentage of ethnicities matches the percentage of ethnicities of the city. So I think, we're kind of a good reflection of that. And one thing that's interesting, I've never had a chance to mention it, so I'll mention it now. I'd say maybe in 2012 and 2013, one of the somebody in the press did an analysis of the management of each city office, by virtue of percentage of, I think, white people versus non-white people, and it started from the big agencies, and we were at the bottom of the list, which meant that in terms of our management staff, we had the most diverse management of any city government, because we were on the bottom. The agencies on top were the agencies that were the least diverse. So I would say that probably still holds up, because we've got, I think all the same managers are still in the office, and it's the same level. I think we have added another person who's a person of color. So I think that in terms of our diversity, I think it's very good. I think the EEOC would bear that out in terms of our audits. I believe we're up to date with all of our compliance in that regard.
Great, thank you so much. And when you said six in Brooklyn and the Bronx, et cetera, you meant in each borough there's
in each
six?
borough there
Got it.
are 6 full-time people assigned.
Got it. Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I don't think we have any other questions. So congratulations again on your renomination. Thanks for everything you do. And hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the next panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good seeing you. We are now we're going to have public testimony at the end for any nominees, so we're going to move on to the next nomination, and then at the end we'll offer people an opportunity to testify. We are now going to move on to the City Planning Commission. Our next public hearing will be a nomination for City Planning Commission. By letter dated June 6, 2024, Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine requested the Council's advice and consent pursuant to Sections 31 and 192 of the New York City Charter for the proposed appointment of Raju Mann, a resident of Brooklyn, we won't hold that against him, to serve a 5-year term as a member of the City Planning Commission. Before I introduce the candidate, I will review the functions and membership qualifications of the CPC. The City Planning Commission is responsible for the conduct of planning related to the orderly growth, improvement, and future development of the city, including adequate and appropriate resources for the housing, business, industry, transportation, distribution, recreation, culture, comfort, convenience, health, and welfare of its population. CPC is also responsible for the review of and has veto power over all proposals to change the zoning map, the city map, and the text of the zoning resolution, site selections for city capital projects, all major concessions, proposed franchises, and revocable consents that the Department of City Planning determines would have land use impacts, proposed housing and urban renewal plans pursuant to state and federal law, sales, acquisitions, leases, and other dispositions of real property of and by the city, and the granting of special permits pursuant to the zoning resolution. The CPC oversees the implementation of laws that require environmental reviews of actions taken by the city, in particular City Environmental Quality Review, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act. CPC assists the mayor and other officials in developing the 10-year capital strategy, the 4-year capital program, as well as the annual statement of needs. The CPC is also responsible for promulgating various rules, establishing the minimum standards for certification of applications that are subject to the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, commonly known as ULURP, establishing the minimum standards and procedural requirements for community boards, borough presidents, borough boards, and the commission itself in the exercise of their duties and responsibilities in ULURP, establishing specific time periods for pre-certification review of applications subject to ULURP, establishing the procedures for environmental reviews required by law, including the procedures for the preparation and filing of environmental assessment statements and environmental impact statements, establishing the minimum standards for the form and content of 197A plans, listing major concessions or establishing a procedure for determining whether a concession is defined as a major concession, CPC also has the power to modify any amendments proposed by the mayor to change the rules governing site selection and fair distribution of city facilities. It has the exclusive power to propose additional categories of land use actions to review pursuant to ULURP, subject to enactment by the City Council. City Planning Commission consists of 13 members with a chair and 6 appointments made by the mayor, 1 by the public advocate, and 1 by each borough president. Members are to be chosen for their independence, integrity, and civic commitment. The appointments of all members except the chair are subject to the advice and consent of the City Council. CPC members, except for the chair who serves at the pleasure of the mayor, serve for staggered 5-year terms, which begin the day after expiration of the previous term. For purposes of Chapter 68 of the Charter, CPC members other than the chair shall not be considered regular employees of the City of New York. They are prohibited from holding any other city office while serving on the CPC. There's no limitation on the number of terms a CPC member may serve. The member who is designated as vice chair receives an annual salary of $73,855. The other members receive an annual salary of $64,224. The Manhattan Borough President today requested Council's advice and consent to appoint Raju Mann, once again a resident of Brooklyn, as a member of the City Planning Commission. Mr. Mann is familiar to many of us, having served as director of the City Council's Land Use Division from 2014 to 2022. He was recently appointed as CEO of the Battery Park City Authority, a state authority that manages the use and development 93 acres of the Battery Park City area. I want to welcome him to the dais. And when you're ready and comfortable, if you can raise your right hand to be sworn in.
Do you affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the testimony that you provide to this committee and in answer to all council member questions?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, and congratulations once again on your nomination. You can go ahead and testify.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a real pleasure to be back here. It's great to see so many colleagues and friends at the dais. So I appreciate how busy June is for you all, so I'm going to keep this relatively brief and just offer a few words about what I hope to bring to the City Planning Commission. So I've spent most of my career working in the public or nonprofit sectors. I've worked at the Department of City Planning, served on a community board in Manhattan, worked in the nonprofit advocacy world, and spent 8 years here at the council, and I'm the president and CEO of the Battery Park City Authority. So I've spent a lot of time over the course of my career sorting through regulatory details and policy questions that are at the heart of much of planning and zoning work. I've also had a chance to work closely with many of the actors in the ULURP process and understand how they approach problems, from the agency end to the community end to developers to elected officials. I hope that my understanding of these technical issues and an understanding of the actors in the process will help the CPC balance the challenges New York City faces with the real work of building consensus around those questions. I appreciate change will not come as quickly as any of us would like to many of the challenges New York City faces, but if I'm fortunate enough to be approved by the council, I want to highlight a few areas of initial focus at the City Planning Commission. Number one, I hope to help connect zoning and development policy, particularly at the neighborhood scale, with thoughtful capital planning, so we're addressing multiple needs and challenges simultaneously, especially in the context of large area-wide planning work and rezonings. We must think thoughtfully about how to use public subsidy dollars or invest in public space or schools or sewer capacity, particularly in an era of climate change. Number two, I hope to encourage many of the most fortunate neighborhoods in the city to do more than their part to help address the challenges we confront as a city. I applaud the speaker and the council here in particular for its work on fair housing, and I hope to be a helpful advocate in that regard at the City Planning Commission. Number three, I also hope to do what I can to try to make sure the land use process. Should I start over again or keep going? Okay. Number three, I also hope to do what I can to make sure the land use process is a trust-building one. At the end of the day, the CPC and the council need to make very hard decisions about the future of New York City, but it's important along the way we do whatever we can to respond to concerns, to build and grow trust along the process and work together whenever and wherever we possibly can. I think building trust in institutions and processes is genuinely a collective effort, but I'm eager to do my part if I'm lucky enough to be confirmed to the City Planning Commission. So I'll just wrap up here. I want to thank the Borough President, Borough President Levine and his team for their confidence in me. I want to thank all of you for your time. Excited about the opportunity to continue to serve the city. and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, and thanks for your testimony and your experience here at the City Council. It was always a pleasure working alongside you on a variety of issues. We are in we talk about our housing affordability crisis and our housing crisis here in the city, but also working on a myriad of things right now in the city when it comes to City of Yes and many other big ticket land use items that you will be, if confirmed to the City Planning Commission, will be a big part of. But just taking a step back, your experience here obviously makes you uniquely, I think, qualified to be able to understand the sort of the elected officials side of the equation when it comes to city planning and land use and the tensions that build inside of communities around some of these issues and items, the procedural questions that get called and raised, and obviously the political and policy considerations that an elected official would be going through in terms of an item. Through all that experience and also taking, hopefully importing that to the Senate implementation, can you talk about some of the areas where you think the land use process perhaps could be improved? And I'm not telling you to pick a direction in which direction they might go in, but where you might see like level of improvement around the land use process, where you might see either procedural policy or other changes that might help facilitate, I would say certainly facilitate things like building more housing in the city, to modernize our laws around economic development, things like that. But just functionally, I think that most folks consider this to be a process that warrants updating or modernization. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, thanks for the question. I think it's worth just noting these are hard, contentious conversations often, and so the magic consensus we would all like to see is often elusive. I think that the one place where I'd maybe spend a few minutes focusing on today is the relationship of the capital plan and kind of our development and zoning framework. I do think that there is opportunity to help communities better understand how we're using our public resources in the form of our capital dollars to address challenges that neighborhoods face, while also thinking about the zoning and development future of those neighborhoods. And I think sometimes those conversations can happen on parallel tracks, but don't meet fully in a coherent way for communities to really understand the kinds of open space investments or school investments or sewer investments that are being made that also help support growth. So I think the integration of our capital planning work and our zoning and development policy work, I think is one place where I think we could, can always do better. And that's something that the chair of the CPC has noted, and I think prior chairs of the CPC have noted as well. That requires a lot of interagency coordination, which is just never easy given the number of actors involved in some of these processes. But I'd say that's a place where we can grow, but we can also show communities that we are delivering essential services and infrastructure to help support the growth.
Thanks. You're going to be sitting in a position right before the City Council on a ULURP where you'll be hearing probably from council members. You'll certainly be hearing the opinion of the community board, the borough president, and others ahead of your vote. Can you talk about how those actors might be persuasive or influence, or even just inform how you might approach a certain application, certainly when there's applications that might have large resistance to them, and you're going to hear that, how you find that, weigh those out in the process when determining your vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I mentioned this briefly in my remarks, but I think it's really important that the land use process incentivize, engender trust among the parties involved. And I think that means that the commission and the council have to really find ways of responding to feedback so that people feel like when they show up at hearings that it's worth their time to show up at hearings and that people are taking their opinions and perspective seriously. I think it's pretty critical to the legitimacy of the whole process for people in the process to feel like decision makers are paying attention and are finding ways to respond to the concerns that they're raising. It's, again, never an ability to respond to 100% of the concerns, but if people who are showing up at hearings and taking time out of their day to participate in the public process don't feel like people are listening, it undermines the validity of the process. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to find those opportunities, whether they're big or small, to acknowledge concerns and find ways of incorporating those concerns in projects.
And what are instances where you might hear that type of feedback and say, this application is not ready to be moved forward? Like there's always going to be lots of folks who show up at some of these big hearings to say yes or no. We hate this, we love this, and you're going to have to like put those into an equation and figure out, as you're thinking about that component of it, the community feedback. So how do you? What is the conditions by which one might find themselves to say, this is not, the community has not, we have not engendered trust with the community, we have not built like a foundation here?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's, these are really hard conversations, and it's sort of the nature of democracy, right, to figure out how we make these decisions together. And that's an imperfect process. I think, I'd say there's two things. I'd say one is, there's values that I think, I have that obviously inform the work around equity and ensuring that we have an environment that's better than the one that we inherited, and obviously supporting economic growth. And I think within that context of those values, really understanding what are the pieces of feedback we can absorb from community stakeholders to hopefully advance one of those three objectives. But at the end of the day, the values do need to be somewhat consistent across projects, because otherwise it becomes an ad hoc exercise. And so within the context of those values, I feel like the goal of the commission, the goal of the council partially, is to really find the pieces of feedback that make these projects better, that make these proposals better. Number one, to make sure people understand they're being heard, and number two, to make the projects and proposals better. But that all needs to be anchored with some value framework about what we're trying to do as a city. And at least for me, those kind of three pieces, the kind of building a more equitable city, building a city that's better prepared for the future in environmental context, and building one that's more prosperous, are the three ones that I would highlight.
Got it. We've talked about some of it, but beyond the things discussed already, your experience here at the City Council, can you talk a bit about how you think it has informed your ability to do the job that you're up for now, or the nomination you're up for now, and what lessons maybe you learned here through your time in City Council about the land use process?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, I certainly appreciate how hard the job is for council members, that you have to balance all of these competing constituencies in a district. Some of those constituencies are citywide, some of them are local. You have your own challenges across a particular land use project. You have a million other things you're working on, getting a budget done this month. So I appreciate it is to balance those stakeholders. So I bring a lot of sympathy, I think, just for how hard the job is. Sometimes I think there can be a tendency on agencies and to not fully appreciate the challenging work of building political consensus on difficult projects. So I think I just bring a lot of sympathy because I've seen it firsthand and seen how challenging it is firsthand. I think that's number one. And then number two, obviously I've got a lot of experience on the actual nuts and bolts of the mechanics of how zoning and environmental review work. And so hopefully all of that experience just helps me ask sharper questions and have more informed perspectives on projects.
Thanks. The Manhattan Borough President is nominating you, I think, has talked a lot about the challenges around housing, particularly in our borough,
Yeah.
but frankly throughout the city. I think has been thoughtful in his approach to how to develop and find balance and try to build consensus, but without losing the urgency associated with a city that has under a 2% vacancy rate right now, that's feeling the rising crunch of rents and pressures on families of an assortment of income ranges. Frankly, right now, people fleeing to go to places outside of the city to find refuge from soaring rents and low vacancies. I'm not going to ask you to talk about how you might vote on a specific proposal. We have a long way to go, but we are going to confront a number of these questions in the future about and soon enough about housing affordability and housing supply and the relationship between those two things. Can you talk about how you think about right now the city planning's role and, so frankly, the city's role in confronting those questions, and how if nominated you might tackle the question around affordability when considering these the applications that might come before you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the the question of the decade here in New York. I think the City Planning Commission has a sort of, I'd say, a particular role in helping to set a land use framework for the city's growth, which is sometimes not perfectly coupled to an affordable housing strategy. So I think really at a citywide scale, the challenge in the work is linking our land use policy with our housing policy, which includes a lot of other agencies, especially HPD, to figure out where and how to subsidize affordable housing development, and to think about the resources necessary to really reach the lower incomes, especially, which is not really, I think, city planning, I would say, is not the best tool for reaching the lowest income levels, the ones that are most vulnerable to displacement in New York City. Housing vouchers and housing subsidies are usually the best tools for actually getting help to those communities. So I think big picture, it's making sure our land use policy is linked with a kind of housing strategy, and that those two things are working hand in hand to address the need, and especially the greatest need, which is at the lowest incomes. And so I think the role of the City Planning Commission is really more on the setting the growth and development framework side, which is, how do we help encourage the growth in our housing stock? So if you do have a housing voucher, you can actually find housing, which isn't particularly easy these days, even if you have a housing voucher. So there's a responsibility there to ensure that we have the housing supply, both at the market rate, middle income, and also I think it does help those at the low income, again, for voucher holders, opens up access to housing units that otherwise wouldn't be there. But I think at the end of the day, the housing solution only gets solved with a lot of different agencies at the table, and also with a lot of different layers of government at the table, the city, state, and the federal government. And obviously there's been a lot of work done in the state this year, but I think continues to be more, and especially at the federal level.
Thank you. Thank you for answering those questions. Councilor Taitt, did you have any questions?
Yeah.
We'll move on further to Councilor Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Are you sure that you? No, thank you for being here today, and it's surprising to see that you're excited to join the CPC. But I do think a perspective like yours would be invaluable. I mean, I'm listening to your responses and just skirting around the same question of trying to understand how you, given a vote and a decision at the CPC table, would weigh those questions of affordability and versus community concerns, but understanding that we can only speak in hypotheticals here. But you did say that you don't view land use as the way to get to deep affordability, and that's the work of other policies. But I suppose, having worked on MIH, what do you think is that is the amount that the CPC, that land use policy, can get us to development of more affordable housing?
Yeah, thanks for the question and for the opportunity to sort of explain a little bit better what I was thinking. So I think, especially for those households at no income, 10%, 20%, 30%, which are not an insignificant portion of the New York City population, those kind of most vulnerable New Yorkers, it's very hard to engineer land use policy to really address those kinds of urgent housing needs. That's obviously where the shelter system comes in. That's where vouchers come in particular, where you have a real gap in income, which can't be closed by an affordable housing unit in the way that we subsidize with HPD or MIH. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify. I think that's what I was trying to get at there. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has a role to play. Every agency in the housing ecosystem has a role to play to addressing the affordable housing challenges. I think it needs to be, in my mind, land use policy coupled with housing policy, meaning HPD policy making in particular, to make sure that those two things are working together. So where an area-wide rezoning, for example, is happening, that HPD is at the table thinking through where the long-term affordable housing opportunities sit and how they might deliver the most out of that land use project or proposal. That's not something I think the Commission or the Department of City Planning can do on its own. I think the department does have a responsibility to think about housing growth more broadly and making sure that we are increasing the housing supply for a broad range of New Yorkers. But I don't think that's going to be sufficient for addressing our housing challenges. Again, I think other tools like vouchers and HPD subsidy, investments in NYCHA, et cetera, are the sort of kit of parts that really get to the underlying central housing challenges.
That's helpful. And I guess one more, having sat in several different spaces of land use decision making in the city of New York, how do you think your approach will differ from the perspective of being a member of the CPC versus how you had to help council members out as the director of land use in the council and other roles?
It's a good question, and I've been thinking a lot about that. I mean, I hope what I can do is bring to bear some of the experiences I've had from working on these projects to try to identify challenges that I've seen and identify those challenges much earlier in the process so we can actually have the time and space to solve them. That's what I hope to do, because I know that it's very hard to unravel some of these complicated questions if you don't have the time to unravel it. So what I'm hoping to do really is try to find ways as early as I can in the project's arc to identify what the big and core concerns are, and then hopefully the process is an opportunity to kind of work on some of those issues. And I feel like I've learned a few lessons over the years working on these projects and seeing neighborhoods unfold, and it's constantly a learning exercise. I mean, we never get everything exactly right because the future has things that are surprises in it. But I think I've learned a few things from those projects to realize the kinds of common mistakes that are made, and hopefully can help work on those.
Thank you. Thank you, Raju. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for your testimony. Just want to add a personal note here, which is I've had the privilege of working alongside you in the City Council, and I find few people understand the dynamic of land use and the sort of elected official considerations like you have, and I think that would be a tremendous asset to the City Planning Commission, which often, and this is one of the reasons I think Chair Garodnick does such a great job, is he really understands the balance of all those different factors and has sat in the position of being in one end of the ULURP and certainly understands all the considerations that go into it. So I want to commend the borough president on his nomination. I think he'd be a fantastic addition to the City Planning Commission.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the next. Let me get through my script. Thanks so much. Thank you. We're gonna, as noted, we're gonna move on to We're gonna move on, and we'll do public testimony at the very end. We are now going to move on to the nomination for appointment by the Council of Helen Skipper as a member of the New York City Board of Corrections. You're welcome to come up to the dais. The Board of Corrections is responsible for the inspection and visitation at any time of all institutions and facilities under the jurisdiction of the Department of Correction, DOC, as Department of Correction, commonly known as the DOC, as well as the evaluation of Department of Corrections performance. The BOC must establish minimum standards for the care, custody, correction, treatment, supervision, and discipline of all persons held or confined under the jurisdiction of the department, and shall promulgate such minimum standards and rules and regulations after giving the mayor and commissioner an opportunity to review and comment on the proposed standards or amendments or additions to such standards. The BOC consists of 9 members, 3 members appointed by the mayor, 3 by the council, and 3 by the mayor on the nomination jointly by the presiding justices of the Appellate Division of the Supreme Court for the first and second judicial appointment departments. Appointments are made by the 3 respective appointing authorities on a rotating basis to fill any vacancy. The chairman of the board is designated by the mayor from among its 9 members. The members are appointed for 6-year terms with vacancies filled for the remainder of the unexpired term. The BOC may appoint an executive director to serve at its pleasure with such duties and responsibilities as the board may assign, and other professional, clerical, and support personnel within appropriations for such purpose. The BOC is required to establish procedures for the hearing of grievances, complaints, or requests for assistance by, on behalf of any person held or confined under the jurisdiction of the department or by any employee of the department. BOC also issues a report at least every 3 years on issues related to the department's grievance process. Such report must incorporate direct feedback from incarcerated individuals and proposed recommendations for relevant improvements, and include a section of recommendations on how to improve the grievance process for vulnerable populations, including incarcerated individuals who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and gender nonconforming. Such report must be submitted to the council and posted on the board's website. As a former chair of the Criminal Justice Committee, I can also testify to how important the role that the BOC plays is to the work that we do as city council members. If appointed by the council, Helen Skipper will be eligible to serve the remainder of a 6-year term ending on October 12th, 2026. Welcome to you and congratulations on your nomination. If you can please raise your right hand to be sworn in.
Do you affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the testimony that you provide to this committee and in answer to all council member questions?
Yes, I do.
Thank you and welcome. You can go ahead and testify.
Thank you. So forgive me, I did not prepare an opening statement. I'm in the midst of preparing for a 500-person conference tomorrow, and time is really running past me. But I want to thank you for even having me sit up here. As a person with lived experience, it is imperative that as we begin to look at how we transform and reform these institutions, that we reflect on the fact that those of us who have been through these institutions, who have been in this confinement, who have lived through these experiences, have a seat at the table as we look at the transformation and reformation. It is also imperative that we, as a people, as representatives of New York City, that we make sure that the care, custody, and control of those who are under our purview are done justly, are done humanely, and adhere to minimum standards. And I also believe it is important for the city of New York to not just rest on the fact that minimum standards must be met, but that we should be the forefront in this nation on how we care for people who are in carceral institutions and how we reflect and move on what we should do moving forward. Again, I just would really, again, like to extend my thanks. Again, lived experience that has been translated to professional lived expertise sometimes is in short supply. But we stand at the ready.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the role that you see the Board of Correction playing and why you particularly want to serve as part of that? I know you've touched on that in your opening statement, but talk a little more about the role the board plays and where you see your role in that being.
So the Board of Corrections is, for want of a better word, a watchdog over the Department of Corrections. We are here to make sure that minimum standards are met. We are here to make sure that we develop appropriate minimum standards. We are here to make sure that accountability and transparency is open. New York City DLC is in a state of, for want of a better word, confusion. There are things that are going on that need to be more transparent. There are issues that need to be addressed. There are barriers that need to be overcome. And we are here to ensure that these things are taken care of, again, in a humane and just fashion. Serving on the Board of Corrections, and right now I'm going back to my handwritten notes. This is a chance for me to utilize my personal lived experience that has been elevated to professional lived expertise and bring about change within this current iteration of our justice system. I believe my experience and professional and academic acumen give me unique personal insights into the difficulties and the injustices that for those that are caught up. My efforts would be to defend the rights and dignity of those who are in these carceral spaces while demanding and upholding accountability and transparency of what we need.
Thank you. Last year, the City Council passed a local law notwithstanding the mayor's objections to ban solitary confinement inside of our city jail facilities. The Board of Corrections is scheduled to meet on June 25th to discuss the implementation of the law. Do you believe that the Board of Correction can and should implement Local Law 42 by its effective date, which is at the end of July this year?
I believe strongly in that, and I will lean on my academic knowledge there is empirical research that speaks to the psychological effects of solitary confinement. We are not merely just looking at the fact that solitary confinement is just a punitive measure on top of a punitive measure for a system that should be rehabilitative in nature. We're looking at long-term psychological effects. And again, this is an empirical based research. This is not the way that we should move in a spirit of deflection and diversion.
Thanks. The city council a few years ago passed a plan to move off of Rikers Island, to close down the facilities on Rikers Island and move into borough-based facilities. Is that something you support? And can you talk about what role the BOC might play in moving that plan forward, or when actually implemented, what role the BOC might play to ensure that there's a successful transition from the facilities on Rikers Island to the borough facilities?
I am supportive of that plan, but I do want to note with some modifications. Number one, it is imperative that we look to being more culturally and gender responsive. The criminal justice system as a whole was built for male detainees. When you are dealing with women and gender expansive folks, we need to be responsive to their unique needs. I don't feel that the current iteration of the plan now is at best responsive to that. I don't feel that the city needs to add more bed space. I believe if we defund, and again lean a little bit more heavily on deflection and diversion and alternatives to incarceration, we won't need more bed space, and that these funds can be diverted to community-based organizations that are out here, boots on the ground, as far as helping to tamp down recidivism, helping to bring a trauma-informed atmosphere, helping to lean the system toward rehabilitation more so than punitive confinement.
Thanks. The DOC, in my time when I was the chair of the committee, had seen this concern often, which is reported that many incarcerated individuals are not participating in voluntary educational or other programming inside the facilities. How does the BOC help improve those programs, or at the minimum address that concern that there's many program being offered and many individuals are not taking advantage of it?
So thank you for that question. That you just unpacked a whole lot. First of all, you need to look at the culture. And in order to look at the culture, we need to look at staff, we need to look at training. We need to look at how they lean into and appear during the course of everyday action. A lot of people don't want to attend programs, and they also talk about being a safety issue. As we reflect on training, as we build out training, as we kind of rework the culture of incarceration, as we lean more to a trauma-informed, rehabilitative portion, I believe that those concerns about safety will be tamped down. And another thing I spoke of was Maslow's law of hierarchy, which basically states that as we attend to the most basic of needs, we kind of move up and we kind of step up. So the most basic of needs depend on the physiological, which is things like food, water, and shelter. The next part is safety, which is about personal security. It's about being able to feel secure wherever you are. And this Maslow's law of hierarchy also goes to staff as well. Staff is only as good as they're trained, as their supervisors who provide that welcoming atmosphere. And that does bleed into the culture that is now permeating carceral spaces on Rikers Island. We need programming, and I believe if we instill the right type of programming given by the right type of people, people will attend, because not everybody wants to lay on. And take it from me, I spent 25 years going in and out. Nobody wants to sit there and play cards in the day room all day. We want something that is productive and something that can help rehabilitate us as we look to moving outside of the system.
Thanks. I had one more question for you, which is we've seen an increase of deaths at Rikers Island over the last few years. Feels like we are now constantly opening up the newspaper or social media and finding out another death taking place. Can you talk a little bit about what role the BOC might play in preventing and also doing oversight on deaths inside the city jail facilities?
I think we need to go back down to the basics. We're looking at a semblance of care, custody, and control. But what we really need to do is fully define what care, custody, and control really is. That also reverts back to what I spoke to about before about staff training. In the 25 years that I did on and off Rikers Island, I was always a suicide prevention aide. And I remember even back then that I was the one walking the floor more than the assigned CO. Things like this have to change. These deaths that have occurred on Rikers Island for lack of attention, lack of medical attention, a lack of care and concern, they need to stop because we need to have a humane atmosphere, and we don't have that. We have people dying needlessly because someone just looked at them and said, I don't care about that, that's not my job, and walked the other way.
Thank you. I would ask other members to ask questions, but they will all departed on us. So with that, we'll thank you. Congratulations on your nomination, and look forward to seeing you hopefully at the BOC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our final public hearing today will be on 2 council designations for appointment by the mayor to the Health and Hospitals Corporation. If you folks want to come and join the dais. We have Tricia Taitt, a resident of Queens, who is designated by the council and appointed by the mayor, will be eligible to serve the remainder of a 5-year term that will expire on March 20th, 2025. And Dr. Vincent? Vincent, I have a typo here. Vincent Calamia, a resident of Staten Island, who is designated by the council and reappointed by the mayor, will be eligible to serve the remainder of a 5-year term that will expire on March 20th, 2026. You guys, welcome. Before we hear from the candidates, I'll review the responsibilities of the corporation. The New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, commonly known as HHC, was constituted pursuant to Chapter 1016 of the laws of 1969 as a public benefit corporation, whose purposes are to provide and deliver high quality, dignified, and comprehensive care and treatment for the ill and infirm, both physical and mental, particularly to those who can least afford such services, to extend equally to all served comprehensive health services of the highest quality in an atmosphere of human care and respect, and to protect and to promote and protect as both innovator and advocate the health, welfare, and safety of the people of the state of New York and in the city of New York, and to join with other health workers and communities in partnership to promote and protect health in its fullest sense, the total physical, mental, and social well-being of the people. As provided by law, the board of directors, consisting of 16 members, administers HHC. The law establishing HHC that of the 16 members, the following elected officials or their successors shall be ex officio members: the Administrator of the Health Services Administration, the Commissioner of Health, the Commissioner of Mental Health, Mental Retardation, and Alcoholism Services, the Administrator of the Human Resources Administration, Deputy Mayors, and the Deputy Mayor or City Administrator. 10 additional directors are appointed by the mayor, 5 whom are designated by the city council. The president of HHC serves as the 16th director. Under current bylaws, the board of directors have established the following standing committees: Executive Committee, Finance Committee, Capital Committee, Medical and Professional Affairs Committee, Quality Assurance Committee, Audit Committee, Community Relations Committee, Strategic Planning Committee, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Committee. Each of the standing committees, except for the Audit Committee, shall be composed of the chair of the board, with approval of the majority of the board. In addition to standing committees, the board, by resolution passed by a majority of the whole number of directors, may designate special committees. Each is consist of 3 or more directors, one of whom shall be the chair of the board. The chair of each committee, both standing and special, shall be designated by a majority vote of the board. The term of director, other than those serving ex officio and or at the pleasure of the board, is for 5 years. The mayor shall fill any vacancy which may occur by reason of death, resignation, or otherwise in a matter consistent with their original appointment. Directors do not receive compensation for their services, but are reimbursed for actual and necessary expenses incurred by them in the performance of their official duties. I'd like now to welcome Ms. Taitt and Dr. Calamia and ask that you both raise your right hands to be sworn in.
Do you both affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the testimony that you provide to this committee and in answer to all council member questions?
Yes, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Congratulations to you both on your nomination. You're free to begin, and we'll start with Ms. Taitt.
And thank you to the committee councilman and Keith Powers and everyone who is also virtual on this appointment. I didn't prepare initial remarks, but I would say that given my experience as a finance professional for the past 24 years, partly on Wall Street and more recently as a business owner, I look forward to bringing, my financial expertise and savvy and political connections and experience also on boards to, this appointment. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I also didn't prepare an actual statement, but I do want to thank you, Chairman Powers, and again, our committee members are virtually attending, for having had the privilege of having served prior and again being renominated for this position. And on behalf of the board, I'd also like to express the enormous support that the City Council has provided to Health and Hospitals as we provide care to the community of New York City.
Thank you. I know we're joined by Councilmember Brooks Powers. I think she might have a statement, so I want to see if she is on. If not, we'll come back to her.
I'm here.
Okay, she's here. Hello.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor and privilege to be able to speak in favor of several of the candidates before us today, including, but not limited to, Michael McSweeney, who we work with in the City Council quite often, as well as Raju Mann, who helped to indoctrinate me in the land use process as a council member. And last but certainly not least, Tricia Taitt, who is a constituent of mine within the 31st Council District. Tricia brings a wealth of experience in management and leadership, having successfully led her own company and assisted dozens more in her capacity as CEO. Tricia holds an MBA in business and a Bachelor's of Science in Economics with a finance concentration from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And for 20 years, she's been a leading financial professional. And why I think that she would be an asset to this board, considering the tremendous budget that Health and Hospitals works with, and considering that they are surrounded by many medical professionals, bringing this skill set, I think, would be an added asset to the Health and Hospital Board. And so I wholeheartedly support Tricia's appointment, and I look forward to her continued leadership serving on behalf of New Yorkers across the city of New York. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. Dr. Calamia, you served on the Berger Commission on Healthcare Facilities, which recommended the closure of hospitals in Queens before the COVID-19 pandemic. And Ms. Taitt, you're recommended for appointment by the Queens delegation to City Council. Can you talk about the closure of hospitals in Queens, which many folks have discussed about leading to overcrowding, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic? We saw Queens be an epicenter, and what particularly went wrong there?
So with respect to the closure, there was one particular facility, which is probably the last privately held hospital actually in the state. And the issue was at that time, which the state really did a lot of homework on, was to look at actually what the capacity of the surrounding facilities were and what's called the absorbability, which is if that facility were to close, what would be the impact? I don't think anyone could have anticipated a situation like COVID situation. At that time particularly, the theory was we were overbedded, we had too many beds, and in fact we should be redirecting healthcare more to the community, more to primary care, and less to the in-house facilities. And so what did happen at that point, though, is that there were really, and I hope something that will happen in the future with some of the imminent closings that we're aware of, was that there was an input by every facility, those that were in fact designated to downsize or to close, and likewise information was provided to be sure the surrounding facilities could absorb the closed facility. Closure wasn't actually the goal necessarily, it was transition. And so the one particular hospital in Queens I'm familiar with did have opportunity for potentially working with hospital systems and decreasing beds and so on. That didn't occur. Some of the other facilities did, and in fact were able to be incorporated. And health and hospitals played a big role. In fact, health and hospitals was heavily represented at the time on the commission. And again, it was done in a very orderly fashion. There was a tremendous amount of input from the hospitals, from the surrounding facilities, and a lot of information and funding from the state to be sure that transition could take place. And again, as we apply those type of principles to some of the facilities we're looking at in the go forward, I would hope that a similar process will take place. I haven't seen that at this stage, but I'm hopeful that will occur.
I think at this moment it's important to have a conversation with those hospitals that are being affected within the health system as a result of closures and impending closures, and do an assessment of, what are the cost implications, what's the implications to their operational efficiency, staffing, security, sort of a full assessment of what is going on now with the hospitals that are taking on additional patients to continue to ensure quality of experience and quality of patient care. And after doing an assessment of that, looking at and seeing across the system where there are additional resources that can be leveraged, that can be shared with these hospitals that are taking on the additional patients. And I do see that the board's responsibility in that would be to be informed of what's going on in terms of the impact to cost and operational efficiency, and to encourage senior leadership and the providers within the system to assess what resources are available to be shared with impacted hospitals. And then, of course, to assess and approve, because I assume that I would be on a finance committee or audit committee of some sort, but to assess and approve any potential cost implications or shifts in budgets that result because of that, so that we can continue to support, again, hospital leadership, but also that patients have a great experience and they continue to receive quality care.
Thank you. The mayor's tasked H&H with running the Humanitarian Emergency Response and Relief Centers, what we call HERCs, including the Roosevelt Hotel Arrival Center, which is in my district, and contracting to provide food assistance to asylum seekers, refugees, and recent arrivals. This is for both of you. Do you believe that the mayor's decision to put H&H in charge of these functions is more consistent with the corporate's core mission than the missions of other mayoral agencies like the Department of Social Services? And can you tell us why or why not?
First of all, as a board member, I think it's our responsibility to align with the messages that comes from the office we report to. And I think it is important as a board member to continue to uphold the mission, which is to provide comprehensive quality health care to all New Yorkers, regardless of ability to pay. So I would be in support of whatever measures allow for that, and to continue to promote and protect, as both innovator and advocate, the health, welfare, and safety of the people of the city of New York.
Yeah, and let me just say, I think probably the COVID epidemic played a big role, I think, in the ability of health and hospitals to very swiftly move in emergencies, particularly unexpected emergencies that involve large volume. And the circumstance with the asylum seekers and the quick volume that occurred, I think it did make a lot of sense, because health and hospitals can move very swiftly, as it did during COVID, in providing these services, even though they're not necessarily part of our core mission. So it included housing, as you said, it included vouchers, food provision and housing and so on. So these are things that are not typically, in our core mission. But I think the ability to do that quickly was really important. So I think it was a good decision at the time. It's my sense now that these are things that, now that we've reached something, I hope, of a steady state, that we could begin looking at other agencies in the city that are more adept at taking care of these and get back to our core mission, which again is providing the health care, which will continue for these and all the all citizens of New York City and all, again, all of those who are seeking status here. So, again, I think that's the direction. I certainly feel comfortable with pushing the board in that direction, and I think the board as a whole probably has that same belief at this point.
Dr. Calamia, you are a medical doctor who's been on the medical director both of hospital systems and insurance companies, and you've served on the board of H&H for some time. Can you talk about, and without question, that experience is, I believe, helpful and instrumental to being a board member on H&H. Can you talk about beyond knowledge bases in addition to medicine that you feel like might be important to have on the board right now?
Well, I'm very pleased because I haven't met my colleague, I hope, for the near future. So, but I think health and hospitals, again, our core mission is healthcare. It is provision of services to the community. But in addition, there are a lot of stresses and pressures on all healthcare systems, not just our public healthcare system, and making certain we do things efficiently, effectively, with fiscal responsibility are really critical. And I do think that's something we've seen evolve over the last several years. And not to suggest that in prior years there wasn't an enormous effort to make sure we could make certain that we were able to maximize revenue that to do us and so on. But I think that has changed significantly over the last few years, particularly working with private insurers and so on to be able to make certain we're getting the revenue of services we provided. In addition, we've also looked, again, beyond just the in-house hospital-based care. I think we've expanded dramatically to look at community care, primary care, preventive care, and value-based care, which is providing these services at a way that's efficient, effective. And so I think those are all, many of those things are, again, financial expertise. Some of them are housing expertise. There are many social determinants of healthcare that we're involved with. And so some of those things, again, are going to involve areas outside of healthcare. So I think a broad range of expertise is really useful and helpful.
And Ms. Taitt, can you discuss why you want to be on the board and what about your experience makes you a particularly good candidate for serving on the board, and any previous involvement with the healthcare industry or H&H in particular?
Yeah, so I'm going to bring some of my, what I'm doing in my business as I run a fractional CFO company, and so I deal with a lot of business owners with very complex issues, and I definitely feel like I bring that accounting financial savvy to a board like this, even though the numbers are huge and much bigger. I also manage a team of 6, and so being on a board is almost in a way like managing ourselves with respect to the different issues, and we have a sense of not just financial excellence, but also bringing compassion and an understanding with our clients and amongst each other, because finances is usually a sensitive topic for a lot of people, and working with the executives of each hospital and each health center, I think it will be important to have compassion in helping them understand their numbers and how to work their numbers in order to leverage their budget to do the most that they need to be able to do. I also bring my experience working with boards. So I was on the board of a performing arts company. I was also on the board of a charter school, and our responsibility as board members is governance and oversight and to provide strategic vision, but there were a lot of times that we had to make very difficult decisions balancing between the mission of the organization and making fiscally responsible decisions. And in those cases, it was important to have open communication. I think it was important for everyone to understand clearly what the current financial health and status is of the entity of the organization. Not everyone has financial savvy, and I'm really good at distilling jargon into digestible bits. And so once you have clarity on what the numbers are, what the current situation is, I think you can have an open conversation on how to fix or resolve any financial issues. So I bring those various experiences to the board. One of that in a management space as a business owner, one as someone who's also been on a board and having to work collaboratively with other board members to come to a final decision, and also just someone who has compassion and emotional intelligence as a value within a space where there are probably more medical people on the board than there are people that that understand revenue drivers and cost drivers and things that can be affect the financial stability or even how we present to the rest of the world, because I know the audits are public, the financials are public, and it's important for I think the city council and all those involved in funding the healthcare system to understand how we're using our dollars.
Thank you both. I would ask folks ask questions, just me though. So thank you guys for your testimony and for answering questions, and congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll now hear if there are any folks who are signed up for public testimony. I don't see any. We'll go to check to see if there's anyone online. And with that, we will close this hearing. Thanks.
So yes, you have big shoes to fill. Let me tell you, I think you're more than up to it. It's to me such a pleasure working with you.
Thank you. Tell me your name again.
Vince Calamia.
Vince Calamia.
Yeah, I'm from Staten Island.
Okay. All right. Tricia Taitt.
Tricia, such a pleasure.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
So
It's a